One of the best feelings in the world is trapping your opponent just like this and checkmating him during the opening phase of the game. The feeling of delivering a checkmate using a deadly trap in the first few moves is unlike anything else, and that's why in today's video I'm going to show you 7 incredible opening traps that you can use in your own games to deliver a brutal checkmate in the opening phase of the game. These traps actually occurred in high-level grandmaster games, so if grandmasters can fall for these traps, then so can your opponents. But don't forget to watch all 7 games to get all of the ideas, and if you enjoy this video, please give it a like and comment down below what your favorite trap is from the video, and let's dive right in. Alright, our first game occurred between 2 titled players, Harshad and Marco Paris-Juke from the Titled Tuesday tournament in the year 2020. This one was the game from the intro of this video. Alright, in the game, Harshad opened 1e4 and black went 1c6, the Caro-Kann defense. Then we have d4 and d5, and here white went for the old main line, that is the move knight to c3. The idea being you do support your pawn on the e4 square. So far, very standard stuff. Here black took on e4, white took back with the knight. Again, very standard stuff so far. And here black went for a very common idea, knight to d7. The point being, he wants to go knight g to f6 with his knight supported by the other knight. That way, if white takes, black can take back with the knight on d7, and black gets a great game. Now here, normally white is going to go for something like knight g to f3, developing his knight and getting good development. However, in this game, Harshad, he went for a very tricky idea that you can use in your own games. That is the move queen to e2. What is the idea behind this move? Well, you are lining up the queen with the black king on the e8 square, and here if black is not careful, he can run into a whole host of problems immediately on move 5 or move 6. Now, what should black be doing right here? Well, I'll tell you one thing. Black should not be playing the move knight g to f6. That is what was played in the game, and as you can see by the eval bar skyrocketing on the left side of your screen, white is going to have a deadly checkmating trap coming up right here. Now, instead of knight g to f6, black can go, say, e6, queen to a5, delivering a check, or any other number of moves. Instead, in the game, knight g to f6 was played, and here, white, all you have to do, you know what, good time for a puzzle. If you like puzzles, pause the video and try to find this tactical idea right here. Again, we did see it in the opening in the intro, sorry, for this video briefly. Here, the key idea, of course, is going to be knight to d6, delivering a brutal checkmate against the black king. Look at this. It is a smothered checkmate. You can't take the knight as that pawn is being pinned to the king by the queen on the e2 square. I mean, talk about a brutal opening trap. All right, our second game of today featuring another brutal checkmating trap. This one was played between Philidor versus Nagy in 1942. In the game, white opens 1e4, and here instead of 1c6 in this game, black goes 1c5 to Sicilian defense, maybe the sharpest response to 1e4 at the highest level. Here, white continues knight to f3, threatening d4, heading for an open Sicilian, and black does play the move knight to c6. Here, at the highest level these days, white typically goes bishop b5, but instead in this game, d4 was chosen, heading for an open Sicilian. Now, most players as white are afraid to go for this line these days, as the Sveshnikov Sicilian for black is so strong, but in this game, instead of the Sveshnikov, here black takes on d4, white takes back, we have knight f6, knight c3, and of course e5 is going to be the dreaded Sveshnikov, but instead here black goes d6, heading for a classical Sicilian. Now, a lot of players at the highest level do play this. I believe Danil Dubov, the Russian grandmaster, is one of the biggest proponents of this as black. Now here in this game, white continues bishop g5, the Richter-Rouser attack. The idea being you're putting immediate pressure on that knight on f6, and you are threatening to simply trade on f6, damaging black's pawn structure. For example, if black goes h6, you can just trade here, permanently damaging black's pawn structure after either e takes or g takes. Now, instead of that, in the game, here black went for a very strange move. That is the move a6. Now, this move is played in the spirit of the Najdorf Sicilian. Black is controlling b5 and potentially setting up the b5 break, but of course, you are allowing white to trade on f6 immediately if he wants to, again, damaging black's pawn structure. Now, instead of a6, the main move here for black is going to be e6. The point being, if white ever takes on f6, you can recapture with the queen, maintaining the integrity of your pawn structure on the king side. Now, instead of that, a6 played in the game, and here, instead of trading trading on f6, white, he just continues development, queen d2, and as we're going to see in this game, this was a very wise choice from white. Now again, black is going to have the opportunity to correct his mistake. He can go e6 here, again, with the idea being if white takes, black takes back with the queen, and black is doing just fine. Now, instead of that here, black, he is concerned about the bishop takes f6 idea, therefore knight d7 was played in the game. Now, this is a very strange move in the classical Sicilian. Black almost never plays this move in these lines. It's a little bit slow. It does avoid the bishop takes f6 idea. However, overall, this knight, I mean, both e5 and c5 aren't exactly the best squares for the knight in the structure, and black's development is so incredibly slow. Now he really can't go e6, as then the queen on d8 would be exposed to the attack by the bishop. All right, white continues, bishop e2, a very logical move, setting up castling on the queen side or the king side, depending on how the game goes. Now, obviously here, black cannot go e6. If he does that, white takes the queen on d8 immediately. Therefore, instead, the bishop on f8, it is going to be headed to g7. So, g6 is the move, setting up bishop g7 with the fianchetto of the dark squared bishop in the spear of the dragon Sicilian. Now here, the most obvious move for white is just going to be long castles, continuing development. However, instead, in the game, here white actually goes knight d5, jumping up with the knight and pressuring that e7 pawn. Things are already getting very, very dangerous for black. All right, here, what should black be doing? Well, I'll tell you one thing, the Ben Feingold counterattack with the move f6 is not recommended, but black does it anyway. f6 was played in the game. I think black was concerned if you go bishop g7, then white can trade on c6 and then potentially trade on e7. For example, bishop g7, knight takes, b takes, and then knight takes e7 or bishop takes would be possible. So, heading back to this position right here, black goes f6 with the idea of blunting white's attack on e7 with the bishop. However, this move has some serious drawbacks, and here, white does not move the bishop. Instead, he jumps in with his knight, knight to e6, a very, very powerful move. The point being, you are capitalizing on the newly weakened e6 square. That f-pawn no longer guards e6, the knight jumps in, it hits the queen, and where can the queen go? Literally, d8, c7, and b6 are all being covered by these knights. Black is in a lot of trouble already. So, with that in mind, queen to a5 is the only move here. Now, black is offering the queen trade. If white trades queens, black is going to be just fine. Maybe a little bit worse. His pawn structure is kind of strange, and that knight on e6 is a monster, but overall, black will be surviving. However, in this game, white does not trade queens. Instead, knight d to c7 was chosen, hitting the king on e8, and look at this. The other knight controls d8, this knight controls e8, and that means the king, well, you have two choices. One, you can sack the queen on c7, but then white takes back and wins the rook anyway, so you can't do that. Instead, in the game, king to f7 chosen. But here, white shows the powerful idea behind his opening trap. He goes knight d8, the point being the king is still under attack. Where's it going to go? You can't go back to e8 as the other knight controls that square. Therefore, you have to go to, say, g7 or g8 and e6. Keep in mind, that is still being controlled by two knights as well. So, in the game, king g7 was chosen. The king steps out of the attack, but now we have the move knight to e8. The other knight jumps in. These two knights are just monsters. One hits the king, the other one guards f7. There's no piece that can take the knight on e8. Therefore, the king must move back to the g8 square. That is the only move. But here, in this position, black, he already resigned on the spot to white, and for good reason. Here, white has a checkmate in 4 moves, literally a forced mate in 4 moves. If you like puzzles, again, pause the video and try to find the forced checkmate in 4 moves, and comment down below if you think you found it. All right, here, real fast, the idea. You just go bishop c4, and from here, it's all over. All black can do to delay the checkmate. Keep in mind, the king's under attack. It can't go to g7. It can't go to f7, and you can't take the bishop. Therefore, the only thing you can do is try to block the attack. So, black's got to go d5. You take the pawn. Then black must sacrifice the queen. Queen takes d5. You take back with the queen. And now the only way to delay it one more move is to go e6. But again, you just trade on e6. Queen takes, hitting the king, and this is checkmate on move 17. Talk about an opening trap. All right, our next game is, or this next trap, sorry, is just as brutal, if not even more brutal than the previous one. Here, white opens 1 e4. This game was played between Powers and William Dake, and in the game, William Dake goes 1 knight f6, the Alekhine's opening. All right, white goes e5, driving back that knight on f6. Black's going to go knight d5, and now here, the main move for white, by far, is going to be d4, gaining space in the center, although c4 is also played a little bit, but instead, in the game, knight to f3 played by white. Now, this is very logical. White does develop the knight and supports that e5 square. However, it doesn't fight for the center as much as d4. Now, black goes d6, putting pressure on that pawn on e5, and again, d4 is going to be the main move here for white by far, but instead, bishop c4 played in the game in the spirit of the Italian opening. Now, that bishop is striking at that knight on d5, that knight is hanging, and therefore black's going to have to do something to defend. Perhaps move a pawn, perhaps move the bishop, or perhaps move the knight off d5. And in the game, knight b6 was chosen, retreating the knight. Now, this looks very logical. You put pressure on that bishop on c4. Now here, most white players would go, say, bishop b3, bishop b2, something like that, keeping the bishop alive and keeping the game going. But instead, in this game here, white, he actually sacrifices the bishop on f7. Bishop takes f7 is the move. Already on move 5, we have a bishop sacrifice, and this is certainly one you can use in your own games. All right, in the game, black takes on f7, king takes, that is forced. If you don't do that, I mean, what else can you do? King d7, that would be suicide. So, king takes, black is up a piece, but white has the attack. Now, white continues, knight g5, hitting the king on f7. The point being, white likely wants to follow up queen to f3 or queen to h5, threatening checkmate on f7. Now here, the king is under check. You can't take the knight, therefore the king must move. And in the game, king g8 was chosen. That is the best square for the king, king to g8. I mean, nothing else makes any sense. King e8, king g6, king e6, all these moves would be just way too, the king would be way too exposed. So, king g8 played in the game, and here white continues, queen to f3. The queen jumps up, threatens checkmate on f7, and what can black do? In the game, black finds the best move, queen to e8, defending on f7 with the queen. Now, of course, if white goes queen f7 check, black takes the queen, and he is up at least a piece after knight takes, king takes. Actually, it would be 2 pieces, 2 minor pieces. That would be no good for white. So, instead here, white's got to make something happen. In the game, e6 was chosen. Now, this move lays a deadly trap. See if you can find this one by pausing the video right now. And of course, the idea, white is threatening queen f7, and after queen takes, pawn takes would be checkmate. Now here, if black wants to defend, he has to go g6, giving his king some extra space on g7. That way, if white goes queen f7, black can eventually take, and after e takes f7, simply go king g7, and his king would be safe. But instead, in the game, h6 was played, and here, white busts out his deadly trap. He goes queen to f7, black takes, and here white does not take with the knight. Oh no, he takes with the pawn. The pawn delivers the checkmate. E takes f7, hits the king. The king is nowhere to go. The pawn is defended by the knight, and the knight also controls the h7 square. Talk about a brutal checkmate. All right, our next game features the players Dupe and Repetto. In the game, Dupe opens 1 e4, black goes e5. Now we have knight to f3, and in this game, black is going to go for the Philidor's defense with the move d6. Now here, white came prepared. He goes d4, expanding in the center, and of course the main line here is perhaps e takes, then knight takes, and the game goes on. But instead here in the game, black actually goes f5, gaining space on the king side. Now this move is not necessarily recommended. However, here black's gonna have some very dangerous ideas. So again, if you want a good opening trap, copy this one from black's perspective. All right, white goes bishop c4, developing his bishop, the Italian style move, and now white is ready for knight g5 ideas, threatening the f7 square with the knight and the bishop. All right, here black takes on d4, e takes d4 chosen in the game, and here white takes on f5, e takes f5, and now the big feature of the game is the open e file. Both sides have the exposed kings kings on the e-file on e1 and e8, and therefore with that in mind here, black simply goes queen to e7, delivering a check to the king on the e1 square. It's a very logical move. Of course, the drawback is you are blocking in the bishop on f8. It's very hard to develop that bishop. However, beyond that, black is doing relatively okay. Now here, the best move for white is perhaps queen to e2 or maybe king to f1, sliding the king over to safety. But instead, in the game, king d2 is chosen. Now, this move does have an idea. White's goal is to go rook to e1, and of course then the queen on e7 would be pinned to the king on the e8 square. That would be very, very dangerous. However, here, black, he came prepared. He goes for the move g6. He actually ignores the idea of rook to e1, and this is where things get absolutely insane in this game. White goes rook to e1, laying his trap, trying to pin the queen on e7 to the king on e8, and he is successful. However, he doesn't realize the strength of black's trap here. Here, black goes bishop to h6, hitting the king on the d2 square. The king has to move. In the game, king d3 is chosen, and now here black brings out the other bishop. Bishop takes f5. These two bishops slicing down the board, cutting off the king. Now here, king takes d4 is virtually forced. There's nothing else you can really do. Maybe rook to e4 technically blocks the check, but then queen takes e4 would be mate on the spot. So instead, king takes d4 chosen, and now black smells blood. He brings back the bishop g7, hitting the king on the d4 square. Now what can white do? I mean, maybe you want to block the attack with, say, knight e5, rook e5, but then the d pawn just takes the piece and black's going to be up material. So instead, in the game, white, he goes king d5. I mean, nothing else makes any sense. You can't go back here. The bishop covers it. You can't go here. The queen covers it. You can't go back to c3. The bishop covers that square. Therefore, king d5 might be the only square the king can actually go to. But here, black lays his final trap. He plays the move c6. And here, this is a brutal checkmate. There's nothing white can do. The game's effectively over on the spot. Literally every single square is being covered by the black pieces, and of course you can't trade on c6 as that square is also being covered twice by the black pieces. Talk about a brutal checkmate trap out of the opening. All right, diving into our fifth game here, it is Lohman versus Teschner from 1950. This one starts with the move 1d4, but it does transpose back to a French defense after e6 and then e4, and finally black does go d5. We have the good old-fashioned French defense on the board. Now here in this game, white does go knight c3. That is the main line, supporting that pawn on e4. Black takes it, white takes back, and that is what happens. So d takes, knight takes e4, and now black has a wide variety of ways to continue. His main problem is he needs to find some way to get his kingside pieces out into the game and castle his king. So in this game, knight d7 was chosen. The point being, you want to go knight f6 and then recapture on f6 with the other knight if white takes there. It's a very solid way to play as black. Now here white goes knight to f3, black goes knight g to f6, and here white has a wide variety of ways to continue. The strongest line may be knight takes f6, but bishop d3, queen to e2, and so on are all playable, bishop g5, and so on. But in this game here, white goes for a very tricky move, knight e to g5. What is the idea behind this move? Well, it's a very aggressive move. From here, this knight is eyeing the f7 and the e6 squares. He may be thinking about a potential sacrifice as early as move 7. Now here, the best move for black is actually h6, putting the question to the knight. But instead, in this game, bishop e7 was chosen, and this walks right into white's trap. In this game, white actually goes knight takes f7. Now, this is not the best move according to the engine, but it is very tricky, and it does lead to a very, very tricky trap. All right, here black is virtually forced to take the knight. If you don't take the knight, white wins either the queen or the rook on h8. Neither of those are acceptable, so king takes is the only move. Now here, obviously, white's going to follow up knight g5. This is the idea behind the sacrifice. You are hitting the knight and the pawn on e6. Now the king must move, and no matter where you move the king, say backwards or forwards, you do give up the defense of that pawn on e6. That knight will jump in and take it and pressure the queen on d8. That is the entire idea behind this sacrifice. Now, In the game, black does find the best square for the king. That is going to be g8. On g8, yes, the king does block in the rook on the h8 square, at least for now, but beyond that, there's simply no other good square for the king. You got to get it away from the action. Now here, white does take on e6. Knight takes e6 chosen in the game. And now, here's the big question. What do you do about the queen? Obviously, that knight is targeting the queen, but where do you want to move it? It looks like queen to e8 is the only good square for the queen, or so it seems. This is another good time for a puzzle. If you like puzzles, pause the video right now and try to find the best idea for black right here. Well, in the game, queen to e8 was chosen, but I do want to show you there's a much better idea. Instead, here, you can actually go bishop b4, putting pressure on the king on e1. And if white blocks the attack, then you go queen to e7. So the idea being the bishop was on e7, but now it's not. e7 is free for the queen, and even if white takes on b4, you take the knight on e6, hitting the king with check, and you're doing just fine. Now, instead of all this, in the game, queen to e8 was chosen, and this is technically not a good move, but it does lay an absolutely insane trap that white has to be so careful to avoid. And in the game, white does not spot the threat. Here, white actually goes knight takes c7. But this is already a massive mistake. Instead of that, bishop c4 was the right idea, defending that knight on e6. But instead, in the game, knight takes c7 chosen. And as you can see by the eval bar collapsing here, black has a checkmate in one move. If you like puzzles, again, pause the video and see if you can find this checkmate right here. And of course, the key idea, bishop b4, and this is checkmate. Here's why. The queen hits the king. The bishop hits the king. Whenever you have a double check in chess with two pieces checking the king, you must move the king, but in this scenario, the king has nowhere to go. Both these squares are being covered, and for that reason, it is a checkmate on the spot. Wow, what a trap from this game. All right, diving into our sixth game and sixth checkmate trap out of the opening. This one is Sicilian versus Thomas Patton from the year 2004. In the game, white opens 1e4, and we do head for the Italian game after e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then bishop c4. The good old-fashioned Italian opening, putting pressure on that pawn on f7. Now here, black goes knight to f6, the two knights defense, a very, very solid way to play. But of course, there are a ton of traps here. The main move at the highest level these days is d3, supporting the pawn on e4, but there are a variety of tricky ideas. For example, d4 and knight g5 certainly come to mind. And in the game, white does go d4, trying to open up the center before black has castled. Now, in the game, black takes on d4, e takes d4. That is the best response. White castles. And now here, according to the engine, knight takes e4 is the way forward for black, winning that pawn and setting up the d5 advance, supporting that knight on e4. But instead, in the game, h6 was chosen. Now, this move looks logical. It does control g5, it stops knight g5 and bishop g5 ideas. However, overall, it's a little bit slow, and white's going to have a variety of ways to continue. For example, e5 is quite strong here, but instead, in the game, knight to h4 was chosen. Now, this move is technically a little bit of a mistake. The knight is not doing a whole lot on h4, at least for right now. The idea is you are eyeing that f5 square and potentially putting pressure on g7, and beyond that, the queen can also come into the game on f3 or maybe on h5 in the future. But again, for right now, it's not that dangerous, but it does lay a very serious trap that black walks right into. Now, for black, the best move here is going to be bishop c5. You simply develop and you're doing just fine. But instead here, black does take the pawn and he takes it one move too late. If you want to do that, you had to do it before going h6 and before white went knight to f3. Now here, white already has a very serious trap, a very serious piece sacrifice. That's my one hint for you. If you like puzzles, pause the video and try to find the right idea for white right here. And of course, the key idea, white didn't play it in the game, but the key idea is going to be bishop takes f7. The point being, if the king takes, you follow up queen h5 check, hitting the king, and the attack continues. Now, instead of that, in the game, queen h5 was chosen immediately, and it has a very similar idea. You are threatening queen queen takes f7 checkmate on the spot, and black obviously is going to have to defend. Now, the best defensive move is queen to f6, guarding f7 with the queen, and the queen is active. But instead, in the game, g6 was chosen, and this move is a fatal mistake because here, white has a beautiful checkmate trap. It starts with the move bishop takes f7. The point being, you remove the defender of the pawn on g6. Once you take here, now queen takes g6 is a very serious threat. The king takes the bishop, then the queen takes the pawn, queen takes g6. The king has to move, king to e7. There's no other good square. The queen controls literally every other possible square. e7 is the only place the king can go. So, king to e7 chosen in the game, and now we finally see the idea behind that knight to f5. Obviously, the queen controls every possible square the king could go to here. All you have to do is put the king in check, and it will be checkmate, and white does exactly that. Knight to f5 chosen in the game, and it's going to be a checkmate on the spot. What a beautiful trap in the Italian game. All right, diving into our final trap of the game. This one is simply unbelievable. If you made it this far, you are about to be rewarded in a very, very big way. The game opens e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and here, instead of the main moves, bishop c4 or bishop e5, white does go knight to c3, heading for sort of a 4 knights opening. However, here black, he does not play the main move knight to f6. Instead, g6 was chosen in the game, and this move is a very serious mistake. You're obviously weakening the dark squares around the king, especially on g5, f6, and h6. And here, white finds a beautiful way to capitalize on this immediately. He breaks in the center with the move d4. Now, obviously, the idea being normally, if black takes, you take back with the knight. But instead, white has a completely different idea in mind for this game. Here, black takes, and white does not take on d4. Oh no, he goes knight d5, jumping up with the knight. What is the idea? Well, it's very simple. After black went g6, again, he permanently weakened that f6 square. Now, if black goes, say, knight f6, bishop g5 is going to be incredibly annoying. So, black, with that in mind, goes bishop g7, but here, bishop g5 comes anyway. And now, already, on move 6, black has to find a very precise move just to hang in the game. He's got to find the right piece to bring out. Now, obviously, if you go knight f6, that would be a colossal mistake as e5 hits the pinned knight on f6, and white is virtually winning, as you can see by the eval bar on your left. So, that is not the right idea. With that in mind, you do need to block the attack with a knight on e7. But which knight do you bring out? That is my puzzle for you. Try to figure out the right piece right here. Well, the right move is knight c to e7. The point being, you bring this knight back because the other knight still controls the f6 square. If you bring out the knight on g8, it loses control of f6, and that would be deadly. And that is what happens in the game. So, knight g to e7 chosen in the game. Now white takes on d4, knight takes d4, and already this is getting critical. I mean, look at this position. If you take on d4 with your knight, knight takes d4, white takes on e7 with the bishop, bishop takes, and the queen is trapped. If you take with the bishop, white's going to have some very dangerous ideas, as we're about to see. Already, the best move according to the engine is the Ben Feingold counterattack with the move f6, but that is an ugly move. You do not want to have to play that already on move 7. Now, of course, that knight on d4, it's being attacked twice by the knight on c6 and the bishop, and it's only being defended once by the queen on d1. So, the big question, can black take it with the bishop? That's what he did in the game, but this turns out to be a huge mistake because here, white has one of the most insane queen sacrifices you will ever see. Yes, right here, white goes queen takes d4, giving up his queen for the bishop. What is the idea? Well, it is a deflection sacrifice. On d4, the bishop controls f6. So, queen takes d4, removes the defender. Black takes the queen. What else can you do? And here, white has a checkmate in 2 moves. First of all, you give the check on f6. Knight f6 check hits the king. The king has to move. It goes to f8. And now, bishop to h6 delivers the checkmate. What a finish to this game. I mean, I tell you, this is one of the most unbelievable checkmates I have seen in a very long time. The bishop and the knight teaming together to cut off every single square the king can't go to and to deliver the checkmate with the bishop. Very impressive stuff. All right, Chess YouTube, hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, show me some love. Smash that like button for me and comment down below what you thought of this game, and comment down below in terms of what you want to see next out of my opening videos. I'm focusing a lot on opening videos these days. And by the way, if you want to learn chess openings directly from me, join my school community. The link will be in the description and hopefully the pinned comment as well. So check it out. I've got links all over the place for my school community. It's where you can work directly with me to improve your chess openings and level up your chess. If that sounds interesting to you, it's a free community for right now, but only for the first 100 members. So check it out, and I'll see you in the next video.